So if you're flying out of northern Colorado in June of 2026, um, thousands of pilots are going to be facing a really intense, high-stakes mathematical tightrope.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive squeeze.
Right, because they'll be staring down a runway that has just suddenly been chopped in half by construction crews,
Yeah.
and they're sitting inside these machines that are basically suffocating in the thin, hot summer air.
Yeah, which is terrifying if you aren't prepared.
Exactly. Surviving that kind of operational pressure doesn't just require you to be a good pilot. It requires this invisible, highly structured, and frankly, obsessive human ecosystem.
An ecosystem that is operating long before anyone even, touches a throttle.
Right. And today we are mapping that exact ecosystem because we've got our hands on the May 2026 edition of Flightlines.
Which is the official newsletter of the Colorado Pilots Association, right? The CPA.
Yep, the CPA.
Yeah.
And it gives us this incredible window into the community.
It really is a remarkable document to unpack because, if you only look at aviation from the outside, you mostly just see the hardware, the planes.
Just the shiny metal.
Exactly. But this stack of sources we have, it ranges from messages by the association's president all the way down to the gritty details of digital infrastructure.
Like website migrations.
Yeah, exactly. And it reveals the connective tissue. We're looking at a localized community that is constantly balancing a relentless commitment to safety against, mounting public friction.
While also trying to manage the physical and financial realities of keeping their passion off the ground.
Right, and the digital realities too.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to survive that runway tightrope we just talked about, there has to be a culture of extreme diligence already in place.
You have to have the groundwork laid first.
Exactly. And reading through CPA President Andy Holmes's message, you realize that for this community, the upcoming spring, summer, and fall of 2026 aren't just about, getting good flying weather.
No, they're critical seasons for maintaining the social architecture.
The social architecture that literally keeps people alive.
Yeah, and that social architecture is the foundation of everything they do. Holmes is pushing really hard for participation in the classic staples of general aviation.
Like the fly-ins.
Right, the fly-ins, the hangar gatherings, and of course, the ubiquitous $100 hamburger runs.
Which is such a great tradition.
It really is. But what's crucial here is that he's actively trying to expand the perimeter of that culture.
How so?
Well, he isn't just targeting the people logging the flight hours. He makes a very deliberate call to integrate the mechanics.
Oh, right, the AMPs.
Yeah, the airframe and power plant mechanics and the avionics technicians. He wants them at these social gatherings too.
Which, that is such a necessary course correction for the industry because culturally, the pilot always gets the glory, right?
Oh, always. They were the aviators, they fly the plane.
Exactly. But the mechanics are the ones who actually sign the logbooks. They take legal responsibility for the physics of the machine.
They're the unsung heroes of the ramp. Without them, nobody leaves the ground.
Right. And if they aren't integrated into the social fabric, the whole operation is at risk. It kind of makes me think about how we usually view general aviation, like a local community garden.
A community garden. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, like it only survives if people physically show up, talk to their neighbors, and really respect the caretakers, which in this case are the mechanics.
That's a great analogy because we do tend to romanticize these hang gatherings as just a bunch of folks swapping tall tales over a grill.
Just drinking coffee and complaining about the weather.
Right. But looking at Holmes Cush, I'd argue it's much closer to like an open source bug bounty program.
An open source bug bounty. Okay, walk me through your thinking there.
Well, think about what's actually happening at something like the upcoming Jeffco Aviation Association's 29th annual fly-in.
Which is on June 6th, right?
Yep, June 6th. And sure, they're having a pancake and sausage breakfast.
Can't have a fly-in without pancakes.
Exactly. But when pilots and mechanics are lingering at the FBO, chatting over those pancakes, they are actively patching the gaps in each other's knowledge bases.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, someone casually mentions a weird downdraft they experienced over a specific ridge yesterday.
Exactly. Or someone else talks about a subtle manifold pressure drop they noticed on a climb out.
So they're informally reporting and fixing system bugs before those bugs can cause a fatal failure in the air.
Precisely. That is how localized safety cultures operate. The informal data transfer is, honestly, just as critical as the official FAA briefings.
Right, because it's real-time local knowledge.
Yeah. But that internal communication network eventually hits a wall.
Right, because they have to deal with the outside world.
Exactly. Because while this community is brilliant at talking to itself, the newsletter reveals a deep, ongoing crisis in how they communicate with the non-flying public on the ground.
The public relations nightmare.
It really is.
And it seems to center entirely around the touch-and-go landing. Like, the newsletter dedicates serious real estate to the friction between pilots' shooting patterns and the homeowners living underneath them.
It's a huge issue.
And it's fascinating because the CPA is desperately trying to engineer this massive psychological shift in how pilots handle those exact noise complaints.
What's fascinating here is that the CPA is openly admitting that the default pilot response to angry neighbors has been an utter failure.
It's been terrible.
It really has. For decades, the standard playbook for a pilot confronted by a frustrated homeowner was to basically cite the federal aviation regulations.
Just throw the FRs at them.
Yeah, to say, the airspace is public, the FRs allow me to fly here, and, well, you chose to buy a house next to an airport.
I have to stop you there because the sheer arrogance of that default argument has always baffled me.
It's incredibly dismissive.
Right. Put yourself in the shoes of a homeowner. Your windows are rattling every 4 minutes because a Cessna 172 is doing pattern work.
Over and over again.
Exactly. Does citing a federal regulation ever actually work to calm them down? It's a completely tone-deaf communication strategy.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Being legally correct doesn't prevent a neighborhood coalition from petitioning the city council to just shut down your local airfield.
Right. You might win the argument but lose the airport.
And that is exactly the existential threat the CPA is trying to mitigate.
Okay.
I mean, there are over 20,000 active pilots in Colorado.
20,000.
Yeah, according to the 2025 FAA data cited in the newsletter. So the sheer volume of training operations is massive.
That's a lot of touch and goes.
A lot. So the CPA, under Holmes's direction, is telling its members to completely drop the defensive, legally shielded posture.
They want them to be ambassadors instead.
Exactly. They are asking pilots to become ambassadors. They want them to listen, acknowledge the noise impact, and then radically reframe the perceived utility of the airport.
So shifting the public's perception from, like, this is a noisy playground for hobbyists to this is essential municipal infrastructure.
Yes, exactly that.
Which is a heavy lift. How exactly are they equipping pilots to make that argument?
By arming them with the broader operational reality. When a neighbor complains about the noise of a pilot doing touch and goes, the CPA wants that pilot to explain the mechanics of proficiency.
Like why they have to do it over and over.
Right. Much like a surgeon practicing sutures, a pilot's muscle memory degrades without intense physical repetition.
You can't just read a book about it.
No, you have to do it. And then they connect that proficiency to public safety. The infrastructure supporting those noisy training flights is the exact same infrastructure that generates over 348,000 jobs in Colorado.
Wow.
And $23.5 billion in payroll.
That's massive economic weight.
It is, and it's the same infrastructure required for aerial firefighting, flood disaster relief, and life flight medical transports.
Right. So the argument becomes, the pilot annoying you with pattern work today might be the one flying your donor organ through a blizzard tomorrow.
Exactly. You're building a bridge instead of burning one.
Right. But establishing that kind of ambassadorial goodwill isn't just about managing immediate noise complaints. The CPA is playing a much longer game here.
Oh, definitely.
Because their educational mandate spans the entire human experience. I was reading the section on their community outreach, and on April 8th, the CPA Education Committee went to Granlund Country Day School in Denver.
Right, I saw that.
They sent Ashley Morgan, who is a 737 Fleet technical instructor, and Kelly Kang, who is an incredibly highly rated instructor. She has her CFI, CFII, and MEI certs.
Those are heavy-hitting credentials.
Seriously. And they didn't go to a high school or a college. They went to a classroom of preschoolers.
And they taught a dedicated lesson on meteorology.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting for me. When we usually teach weather to preschoolers, it's just basic science, right?
Yeah, clouds, rain, maybe the water cycle if they're advanced.
Exactly. But Morgan and Kang were teaching weather through the lens of an aviator.
That's a huge difference.
It is. They were demonstrating that the atmosphere isn't just a backdrop. It's a dynamic, fluid system that literally dictates survival.
They're planting the seed early.
Yeah, showing them that weather is a critical navigation tool.
Right.
Like leveling up in a video game, the basic rules are the same, but the stakes change.
Which sets up an incredible contrast with the other end of the CPA's educational pipeline.
The cradle-to-grave pipeline.
Exactly. You have preschoolers learning that wind has force, and then you fast forward a few decades to the CPA's flagship program.
The Mountain Flying and High Elevation Airport Operations course.
That's the one. They have dates for this coming up in June, August, and September of 2026.
And this course has been around a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has roots going all the way back to 1986. And it deals with the exact same fundamental atmospheric principles taught to those preschoolers.
But the margin of error has shrunk to zero.
Absolutely zero.
Let's talk about that margin of error, because the newsletter points out that accident statistics are heavily skewed against pilots who lack specific mountain training.
It's a very unforgiving environment.
Right. To someone who mostly flies at sea level, the Rockies just look beautiful.
Yeah.
But mathematically, what is actually happening to an aircraft when it tries to operate in that high elevation environment?
It basically all comes down to density altitude.
Okay, break that down for us.
So an internal combustion engine is essentially just an air pump.
Right.
It needs oxygen to mix with fuel for combustion.
Yeah.
As you climb into the Rockies, the air becomes significantly less dense.
Because you're so high up.
Yeah, there are literally fewer air molecules per cubic foot. So the engine is gasping for breath, which means it produces a fraction of its rated horsepower.
Wow.
But it gets worse, because simultaneously the propeller, which is just a spinning wing, right?
Right.
It has less air to bite into, so it generates less thrust.
Double whammy.
Triple whammy, actually. Because finally, the main wings have fewer air molecules flowing over them, so they generate less lift.
So you are dealing with a threefold aerodynamic penalty. That's a cascading failure of performance.
Precisely. You have a sluggish aircraft flying into volatile, localized weather systems and treacherous terrain.
That's terrifying.
It is. And this is why the CPA's focus on structured data is so vital. The newsletter highlights the release of the 2026 Colorado Aeronautical Chart.
Oh, right, the new charts.
Yeah, and it includes the second phase of 10 new Colorado Mountain Pass VFR GPS waypoints.
Bringing the total to 20 charted passes.
Yeah, exactly, 20 in total now.
And for the listener who isn't spending their weekends staring at aeronautical charts, a VFR GPS waypoint in a mountain pass isn't just a suggestion on a map.
Far from it.
It is a highly specific, mathematically vetted path. It's designed to thread an aircraft through the safest possible corridor.
Taking into account terrain clearance and typical wind patterns.
Right. It is literally charting a path through the safest part of the danger zone.
Exactly. But here's the thing. You cannot practice threading that needle, and you cannot train for those high-altitude scenarios without physical infrastructure on the ground.
Which brings us back to that mathematical tightrope you mentioned in the intro.
The grounded reality of keeping this whole ecosystem functional requires, pouring concrete and managing logistics.
Yeah, so let's dive into Section 4, the nuts and bolts. Let's look at the Northern Colorado Regional Airport, KFNL.
This is a perfect example.
Right. Starting June 1st, 2026, they are initiating a massive runway construction project. They are widening runway 1933 from 100 feet to 150 feet.
Which sounds like a great upgrade for capacity on paper.
It does. It sounds awesome.
It is a vital upgrade for the region's future. But the transition period is going to be brutal.
Because of the shortening, right.
Yeah. During phases 1 and 2, which stretch all the way until November 9th, that runway is being drastically shortened to just 3,750 feet.
And the newsletter specifically warns pilots that this will require precise pre-flight performance calculations.
Very precise.
Wait, I need to stop you there and play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
To a layperson, or even a pilot used to operating out of sea-level airports, 3,750 feet still sounds like, well, over half a mile of pavement.
It sounds like plenty of room.
Right. Why is that sudden reduction treated like an absolute brick wall in the CPA newsletter?
Because of that density altitude penalty we just discussed, combined with the heat of the Colorado summer.
Oh, right. The heat makes the air even thinner.
Exactly. Let's say you have a fully loaded aircraft that normally needs 1,500 feet of runway to take off on a nice cool day at sea level.
Okay, easy enough.
If you put that exact same aircraft on the KFNL runway in July, when the tarmac is just baking in the sun and the air is incredibly thin.
That aircraft might suddenly require 3,500 feet just to get the wheels off the ground.
Exactly, leaving you with just 250 feet of margin.
At 80 miles an hour, 250 feet disappears in a blink.
It vanishes. Your margin of error is completely gone. That 3,750-foot limit means pilots can no longer rely on intuition or past experience. They have to sit down with the performance charts for their specific aircraft and calculate the exact physics of the day's atmospheric conditions.
So if the math says they need 3,800 feet, they cannot take off. They are literally grounded by the laws of physics.
Grounded.
Which is a perfect segue into the other factor that grounds pilots, the sheer financial burden of the physical hardware.
Oh, yes. The costs.
The newsletter features this really candid snippet from Bill Marvel. The community affectionately refers to him as the RV-14A guy.
I love that title.
Right. And he strips away the romance of aircraft ownership real quick.
He lays out the inescapable economics very clearly.
It is a sobering read.
Right.
He points out that if you rent an aircraft, your costs are basically capped at the hourly rate. You pay, you fly, you go home.
But the moment you take ownership, you are entering a complex web of financial liabilities.
You're paying for mandatory annual inspections.
You're dealing with spiking insurance premiums.
And most pressingly, you are fighting for hangar availability.
That's a huge one. Across the country, the wait lists for municipal hangar space can stretch for years.
Years.
Yeah, which obviously drives up the cost of simply storing the machine out of the weather.
Marvel does offer a silver lining, though.
Yeah.
He notes that owners can mitigate some of the bleeding by aggressively shopping around for different suppliers and maintenance shops.
True. But it is still an undeniable barrier to entry.
It really is. So you have the unforgiving physics, you have the massive financial hurdle, and then, this is my absolute favorite part of this entire deep dive,
I know where you're going with this.
the digital infrastructure update.
Ah, yes. The great equalizer.
The irony is just too rich. I mean, we've spent this entire conversation talking about aviators commanding multi-million-dollar machines,
Navigating treacherous mountain passes.
using newly charted GPS waypoints, managing complex engine aspiration, and yet this entire community is currently being terrorized by the same grounded universal nightmare that plagues the rest of us.
A mandatory password reset.
It's hilarious. It grounds us all.
It really does. The CPA is in the middle of a massive website migration in June 2026.
Right, because for the last 7 years, they've been relying on a platform called Club Express.
And the newsletter attempts to be very diplomatic about it, noting that the platform has developed, quote, a number of rough edges.
Which is pilot speak for it's a complete disaster.
Pretty much.
They specifically call out the clunky query string URLs, but the real villain of the story is something they refer to as the 11-step sign-up wizard.
11 steps.
I mean, think about the cognitive dissonance there. You can calculate a localized density altitude curve for a 3,750-foot runway in your head.
But an 11-step web form is where you finally break.
Exactly. I would rather fly through a thunderstorm than click through 11 screens of a sign-up wizard.
The frustration is palpable in the newsletter. The webmaster leading the charge away from Club Express is Brian Garrett.
And what's brilliant about this is that Brian isn't just like an IT guy they hired out of a server farm.
No, not at all.
The stunning photo on the cover of this month's Flightlines newsletter features a beautiful red and white Sling TSI aircraft, tail number N277WG.
That high-performance experimental aircraft belongs to Brian and his wife, Lori.
He is the photographer, the pilot, and the webmaster.
Which perfectly encapsulates that do-it-yourself, fix-it-yourself ethos of the community we established at the beginning.
Totally. But Brian is currently sending out distress signals. He's calling for early bird volunteers to test the new platform before the final cutover.
Because he has to break the news that, due to security protocols, passwords will not migrate.
Every single one of those 20,000 potential users is going to have to manually reset their credentials.
It's going to be chaos.
Oh,
And because of a privacy policy decision made by the board back in January 2025.
the new memname directory requires a manual opt-in.
Right. Meaning, if you want your hangar buddies to be able to look you up, you have to log in and actively check a box. If we connect this to the bigger picture, I mean, it sounds trivial compared to mountain flying. But it's the exact same fundamental concept as the runway construction at KFNL.
How so?
Well, whether you are widening a strip of concrete from 100 feet to 150 feet to handle larger aircraft, or you are migrating a database to bypass an 11-step wizard, you are engaged in infrastructure management.
Oh, I see.
You are systematically identifying friction points and removing them so the system can operate more safely and efficiently.
Because if the digital directory is too hard to use, the community stops talking.
And if they stop talking, the open source bug bounty fails. Maintaining that infrastructure is how the ecosystem ensures its future survival.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the hidden architecture of a highly specialized community today.
We really have.
We started with the informal safety networks forged over hangar cookouts. We looked at the calculated psychological shift required to act as public ambassadors to frustrated neighbors.
We follow the educational pipeline, too. From preschoolers learning that meteorology is a survival tool to veterans spreading the needle through the Rockies using new GPS waypoints.
Right. And we finished with the grounded reality of shrinking runways, soaring hangar costs, and the inescapable dread of database migrations.
And the reason you, the listener, need to understand this ecosystem, even if you never plan to sit in the cockpit, is because this isn't a walled garden.
It affects everyone.
It does. This is a highly structured layer of critical public infrastructure operating right above your house.
So when you hear the engine noise of a student pilot doing touch and goes, you are listening to the sound of civic preparedness.
Exactly. That repetition is forging the muscle memory required to execute a medical transport or drop fire retardant on a localized wildfire.
Or deliver disaster relief. Their rigorous internal culture is directly tied to your external safety.
It's all connected.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. We've seen how much energy this localized community expends trying to justify its existence to the non-flying public, right? Constantly fighting to prove that airports are as vital as highways.
It's an uphill battle.
But as our cities become denser, and as technologies like advanced air mobility and cargo drones begin to really scale, that boundary line is blurring.
It is.
Will we eventually reach a point where urban planning stops treating airspace as a separate domain? Will the concept of a non-flying public eventually just disappear?
Because local aviation has become completely, seamlessly, and inevitably integrated into the daily transit of our lives.
Exactly. It's something to think about the next time you look up, hear an engine, and realize you aren't just looking at a machine.
You're looking at an ecosystem.
Until next time.